Alright guys, welcome to my long edition of my Wii collection. Hopefully I'll be able to go into a bit more detail about some of the games in this video, so it may be a long one, please stick with it. I'd like to think that every game in this pile is definitely worth playing. Some are fantastic, others are above average, but most of them are certainly worth a try. I do have over 100 games, so as I say, this may take a while. I will do it in the order that my short version of my collection is in, so if you see a game that you'd like to maybe know a bit more about, you'll roughly know when it's going to be coming up. So we'll start with the first one. It's 007 Quantum of Solace. This is the exact replica of the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 versions, although nowhere near as good. Unfortunately, you could only play this game with the Wii controls, and it does hamper the experience. It's a bit shifty at places. The graphics are obviously nowhere near as good as the PlayStation and the Xbox version. Still a good game though, still worth playing. It's not the best Bond game on the Wii, but it's definitely still worth playing. I would actually recommend picking up the PlayStation 2 version, because that's a totally different game. That's actually a third person perspective game, and it's much better. Right, next up is The Adventures of Tintin. This is an excellent game. It is the type of game that they don't make on PlayStation and Xbox consoles any longer, because it's sort of a 2D platformer, puzzler, racing, a couple mini games thrown into it as well. It's an odd perspective, not sure if you can maybe see it. It's on a 2D plane, but it's sort of 2.5D, and you could jump to and from the background and foreground, up and down different levels, but it's really fun. I have no interest in Tintin whatsoever, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. It's a good length, it's only around 6 hours long, which for my type of gaming is a good length, because you can complete it in a few nights. It's not going to drag on for hours and hours and hours. But that's Adventures of Tintin. Hidden gem in my mind. Fuck, is the camera fucked already? Right, next up, definitely a hidden gem, A Shadow's Tale. I just picked this up a couple months ago. Really good game. It's very atmospheric. Like I said at the time, it's sort of like Ico on the PlayStation 2, whereas there's not a great deal happens. There's not really any sound effects or talking or anything like that. It's purely just ambient sounds, wonderful soundtrack. Again, it's sort of like a 2.5D platformer, but you play a shadow, and the shadow's actually in the background, so you're not actually running along the plane that you see first. It's actually the background, the shadow, the objects create shadows, and that is what you have to scale. That is the way the platforming comes into it. As I say, it's beautiful. Again, not too long. It's quite challenging at parts, around the 7 or 8 hour mark, but definitely worth picking up. Even if you just fancy trying something a bit different. A remake here, A Boy and His Blob. This game is just a fantastic experience. It's not challenging, it is a puzzle game of sorts. If you have played the original on the NES, it plays just like that. You have to feed your little blob manny here some jelly beans, and he has the ability to transform into different things, such as ladders, trampolines, cannons, things like that. But it's just beautifully hand-drawn graphics. It's again a wonderful atmosphere. It just plays. It's just a good time. It's a change of pace to go from shooting Russians and Germans and things like that, or cyborgs in the future, to just wandering around lands, feeding your wee manny some jelly beans. It's not for everyone, but I'd highly recommend it. This is the type of game I think thrive on the Wii, because they don't exist on the 360 or the PS3. I mean, I'm a firm believer with the Wii that you should own one alongside a PlayStation or an Xbox. I think that's where Nintendo's always went wrong, is they've marketed it as a standalone console. Whereas I think it's definitely a console that you would maybe just play oddities and slightly different genres of games on it. But that's A Boy and His Blob. Very, very good. Right, next up is Alien Syndrome. Again, another remake. This from the old 8-bit days. I've actually got this on my Master System. This one is not so good. I was a tad disappointed because it is made by Sega. It's sort of a top-down isometric type view, almost like a run and gun, but you could fight and shoot people, a couple of melee attacks and things like that. But it's not too great, to be honest. The levels are a little dull. It's not a great variety in the things you could do and bad guys and whatnot. But I've seen this, I think I paid £1 for this out of game, so you could pick it up really, really cheap. So it's definitely worth giving it a go if you see it extremely cheap. Next up is Astro Boy, the video game. Now this, again, I hark back to why the Wii is so good. Astro Boy on the PlayStation 2 wasn't a very spectacular game. They went from a 2D platformer, which it was in the past, to a 3D sort of open world type game, and it just didn't work. It was boring, graphics look terrible today, whereas this is, again, 2D, well 2.5D, and you mix, it's a mixture of platforming levels and flying levels that act more like a shoot 'em up style game. I'm not a massive fan of Astro Boy. I've seen the film, I never really watched the anime or anything like that, but I certainly enjoyed it. You don't need to know the history of the programme, of the series, to appreciate this game. Again, it's not too long. It's kind of for a positive though, because it does slowly start to weigh out its welcome by the end. But again, really good game. And I think that's the key to all these Wii games, is that to pay £40 for them when they first came out, they're not that great games for that price. You don't really get your money's worth. They're only 5, 6, 7 hour long games. But nowadays, since the Wii is sort of in a comeback period, I've noticed, these games are all cheap. Every one of these games you see, apart from maybe 3, can be bought for under £10 easily. So they're definitely worth that price. Right, I'm about 100th of a way through. Next up is another Code R, The Journey into Lost Memories. Now this is a type of game, I'm sure there's a version of this on the DS. It plays like a mystery novel. Its graphics are a little poor, they're almost cel shaded. It's always difficult for me to say that word. But again, you don't really do a hell of a lot. You tend to just run around, talk to people, and solve puzzles. But again, it's a different change of pace. It's quite a relaxing game to play. If you enjoy these, there's a type of game that don't exist anymore. If you, like me, maybe grew up in the sort of the 90s with the Amiga and home computers and things like that, you played a lot of point and click adventures. Broken Swords, Monkey Islands, things like that. These type of games don't exist anymore, and if they do, they're in small numbers. So the Wii had quite a few good point and click adventures, and the Wii remote is ideal for such games. So that's another Code R. Beautiful cover. Right, on to the Bs. Battalion Wars 2. This is the sequel to the GameCube title. The GameCube title, I think, was a little underrated. Not a lot of people talk about it. This plays better than the GameCube one. The controls are a little fiddly. You have to do a few shakes of the nunchuck and the Wii remote and whatnot. But it's a beautiful looking game. It's a large game. I think there's over 40 missions or something like that. And it looks beautiful. If you haven't played a Battalion Wars game, it's basically a war game, sort of like your Command and Conquer style game, but you actually control individual military assets really. That you control the tanks, you control the planes, you control the soldiers individually, and you could also order groups of soldiers and that to attack key points and whatnot. It's really good, quite challenging. It's quite annoying because some of the missions are quite long, and it's fairly frustrating to get to, say, 15 minutes into a mission only to die and you have to do the whole thing again. But it's definitely worth picking up. Again, I've seen this everywhere for £3, so it's definitely worth giving it a try, guys. Just a quick drink. Right, one of my favourite games on the Wii now, multi-platform game, the Beatles Rock Band. I am a huge Beatles fan. If you like the Beatles and if you like the Rock Band games, you'll know what this is all about. It plays identical to the 360 versions and the PlayStation versions. You can still download all the additional music through the Virtual Console. So I will say no more. A brilliant, brilliant game. Even if you're not a fan of the Beatles, it's a great game to whip out at parties and things like that. All the Beatles tunes are always catchy. Right, puzzle game now. Boom Blocks. This was produced by Steven Spielberg, as it says in the top left hand corner there. It's basically a puzzle game where the object is to use your Wii remote as sort of a slingshot to knock over blocks. It's fairly addictive. It's a really good game. There is a sequel called Boom Blocks Party that isn't quite as good. They try and do too much with it, I think. But yeah, this game, there's lots to do. There's over 300 levels. The problem with these games, to be fair, is they're easily played on your mobile phones, your tablets and things like that, so it's not really worth buying it for the Wii. It is a great game, and if you see it for cheap, definitely pick it up. But I wouldn't go hunting for it, to be honest. Here's one that won't really mention too much, Big Brain Academy. I think everyone had this for the Wii. It's Big Brain Academy, what more can I say? It's kind of the type of game that was fun for people not into computer games, but for myself, I've never really gave it much time. I'm intelligent enough. Right, another point and click game, Back to the Future the game. If you know anything about this game, you'll know that it was released as I think it was 5 individual episodes for the PlayStation, PC and Xbox 360. It did eventually come out as a complete game. The Wii version is just identical to all of them. Wonderful point and click game. If you're a huge fan of Back to the Future as I am, it's just a great game to play. It has got its problems, don't get me wrong, but it has got the majority of the speech from the film in it, which is it's definitely a nostalgia kick if you're a fan of Back to the Future. Bit of a music game now, Bit Trip Complete. This was 6 individual downloadable games that were basically 8-bit, sort of pixel related games that you would maybe see on your Atari 2600, but they play them against music. There's Pong, variations of Pong, and a couple of other sort of dancey beat games. It's not that great, to be honest. I kind of feel I was expecting a lot more. I'd never played the games before. The music's good, but the game's difficulty ramps up that fast that you could never quite get to the good parts of the music, because the music progresses with the difficulty of the game. So yeah, I was a little disappointed, but this does come with the soundtrack. So the soundtrack's pretty good, just to listen to on its own when you're cruising about your local high street and things like that, looking for some totty. Another rhythm game now, Beat the Beat Rhythm Paradise. This is sort of your mini game related rhythm game. It's pretty difficult. I'm not musical at all, so I can't kind of keep on to the beat. But some of the mini games that you play along to the music is just phenomenal. They really are quite funny. For instance, there's one you have to try and catch peas in a fork. Everything's used just by the remote, really simple to use, and it is not difficult to find but fairly uncommon. I've only ever seen one copy before in my local shop, so it's definitely going to be sort of a hidden gem for the future, I think. So if you see it, pick it up. Another great little 2.5D platformer here, Batman the Brave and the Bold. This is old school sort of graphics. It's old Batman, old Robin, and again it's a little bit like, what was it called? Tintin, where you're walking along sort of a 2D plane, beating up bad guys, and it's full of classic sort of comebacks and one-liners that you would possibly find in, say, the old Batmans, the old Adam West Batmans. So it's really good. Again, it kind of outstays its welcome. It's not a long game by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a good 6 hours, and you can play with other characters throughout the game, and you could also call on other characters, other superheroes, for some special abilities. So it's definitely worth playing. It's it looks, I'm not really sure, to be honest, if it's aimed at children or not. A lot of these games do seem to look like they're aimed at children, but they are quite difficult. So it might just be because I suck at games. So that's Batman the Brave and the Bold. First person shooters now. Unfortunately, the Wii kind of suffers when it comes to first person shooters. The other consoles tend to take up all that. But here's a good one, the Conduit. It's just a special edition. It just comes with a little booklet, it's nothing really special. Excuse me. But this is quite a good first person shooter. Again, unfortunately you have to use the Wii remote and nunchuck. I'm not a huge fan of that technique, to be honest. I think it's not very precise. I know people do enjoy it. But it plays just like your typical space shooter, sort of like your Halos and Gears of War and whatnot. Obviously it's from a first person perspective, but it's definitely one of the best on the Wii, so it's worth picking up just for that. And here is the sequel, the Conduit 2, again published by Sega. This is slightly better to control because you could use a classic controller for it, and that is one thing I would recommend for the Wii. If you plan to play these games on the Wii, I would recommend getting a classic controller. The games just play so much better with it. But this isn't as good as the first one. It's sort of mediocre. Some of the levels are a little bland. But again, like I said, you're kind of not really spoilt for choice when it comes to shooters on the Wii, so it's definitely worth picking up to give it a go. Nice graphics though. Right. And the final C game, another first person shooter, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3. Everyone knows everything about this game. What I will say is that this is a good version of it. Obviously it doesn't compare to the Xbox and the PlayStation versions, but it certainly does push the Wii to its limits. Some of the actions in the Xbox and Xbox and PS3 versions are cutscenes in this, which is a bit of a cop-out, but you don't really, if you've never played the other versions you won't know. It does have multiplayer, people do still play it online, so yeah, it's Call of Duty at the end of the day. I was fairly impressed with how it looked, certainly compared to Black Ops on the Wii, which I have, but I don't have a box for. That paled significantly to the other versions. That looked like it was on a last gen console, whereas this at least looks like they've put a bit of effort into it. Right, on to more C's. Right, here's a survival horror game, Cursed Mountain. Now this is a really good game. It's a Resident Evil style game, but you're set in a mountain. You're basically an explorer who's looking for his brother who went lost, and you have to climb mountains, you have to go through mountainside towns, visit monasteries and things like that, but the whole game has this sort of quiet, eerie atmosphere to it. You have to fight ghosts, which sounds a bit ridiculous, but it does work quite well. But the majority of the game, not a lot happens, but that's a strong point for it. It builds up the tension, builds up the atmosphere. The ending's a little disappointing. I don't want to spoil it for you, but it is a little disappointing. But it's a really good game, definitely underrated. But stick with it, as I say. The first half an hour is extremely slow, but it does get better. Stick with it. Call of Duty 3, another Call of Duty game. What's strange about this one was this was actually released for the Xbox and the PlayStation 2, so it does show you the type of time scale that games are released over. Considering the Wii came out a good few years after the Xbox and the PlayStation 2, we were certainly struggling for games to start with. Again, this is Call of Duty 3, it's sort of aged. If you prefer the Modern Warfare games, that's fair enough. This still got a good multiplayer. Single player is still good, obviously set in World War II, but you have to use the Wii remote, which sort of hampers the enjoyment out of it. Another survival game now, Cappellas Survival. This is the latest edition of the long-running Cabela's hunting games. This is more sort of a 3D survival horror style game that you use a light gun with. It's pretty good. It does get a little boring, you have to hunt and that in it. I could see how they tried to do something a bit different, but it certainly doesn't really... what can I say about it? It's not a great game, to be honest. I will say that. It's not a great game. It's different compared to the other Capella games, but it's certainly not a Resident Evil style game or anything like that. Cursed Mountain is definitely the better game to try. Right, another update here, sort of a remake, Cruisin'. This is from the original Cruisin' USA games that was popular on the N64. I really enjoyed those games. This is a similar style game, you basically just race from point to point, but it's old school, whereas there's no laws of physics. You could fly 50 feet in the air, no crash damage. You race against 3 other people and you're just racing from point to point basically. If you enjoy old school racers, you'll enjoy this. But if you're more a sort of Gran Turismo or a Forza type person, then this game certainly isn't for you. I have to adjust myself, my legs are killing me here. Right, next up, Dead Rising. Now this is the original Dead Rising that appeared on the Xbox 360. That did have a few problems when it was released, most notably the save system and the difficulty. I did enjoy the concept of Dead Rising, but the difficulty put me off because you had to start so far back if you died. This addresses the problems, they make it a little bit more arcadey. There's a huge amount of loading in this though, which is slightly disappointing, but it's really just Dead Rising 1 for the Wii. In terms of graphics, it's not that far off the 360 version. Obviously the 360 version is an older game, so it has that on its side, but it's still certainly not current gen graphics. But it's worth picking up. It's more a pick up and play style game now as opposed to playing it for any length of time. Right, one of my favourites on the Wii now, Disaster Day of Crisis. This again is a unique game on the Wii. It's sort of a survival game, but it's set in a disaster zone. There's been earthquakes, tsunamis, you name it, this town's got it, and you play this character, Raymond Bryce, and you basically have to try and survive. There's a few mini games built into it where you have to run away from waves, tsunami waves and things like that, and there's a few driving sections and that. They are a little cheesy, a little corny, but it's a really good game. Controls are a little stiff, but give it a chance, and I definitely recommend this game. It's really good fun. Right. Destroy All Humans, Big Willie Unleashed. That sounds like a bit of a porno, but this is the third version of the Destroy All Humans games. If you've played them, this pretty much plays just the same. The advantage of this game is you get to control this Big Willie character. It's a third person action adventure, sort of like a shoot 'em up. Why are you not focusing? It's pretty funny. There's a few funny jokes in that in it. The voice acting in it's pretty amusing, but again, it sort of outstays its welcome. I'm not really sure if this is the version that appears on the 360s and the PS3s or not, but it's pretty good. And the Wii controls are actually pretty decent on it. It's not so waggly, which is always good in a Wii game. Right. Next up is Deadly Creatures. I've talked about this game before. You actually play a spider, and it's sort of again a survival horror game, but instead of zombies and whatnot, it's snakes, humans, various other things out to try and kill you, and you have to try and survive as a spider. It's set in things like ponds, back gardens, construction sites, things like that. It's really good, really unique. It plays similar, not like anything else this generation. The only game I could really think of was, I think it was called actually Spider, or maybe Tarantula actually on the PlayStation 1. But it's really, really good. Definitely recommended. This is definitely a hidden gem. Right, I'll maybe just pause it there, guys, actually, and do this in a few parts because I'm only up to D and I've still got a hell of a lot left to go. So I'll stop it there and start again.